Thank you everyone for coming. I'm Tash. I'm an account manager at TechX. I'm 8 years in the industry, so a baby compared to some of those on the panel. I'm delighted to be joined by Gary Westmoreland from ITV, Dave Haddon from BBC, and James Sanford, also from BBC Research and Development. Gary, can you introduce yourself, job role, and what does that actually mean? What do you do day to day?
Okay, so hi, I'm Gary. I'm Director of Technology for ITV Studios Drama. So what does that mean? I look after Coronation Street over the water, Emmerdale, and all of our high-end content that we do across the company. So that's, us as producers, ITV as producers for Netflix, Disney, Amazon, whoever. So day-to-day, 13 studios, 2 post facilities, 2 locations, and consultancy for our high-end drama slate. So I'm very operationally based. I'm not an engineer by trade. I'm an ex-craft editor. So I'm very on the content production side of things. And I'm 38 years in, Tash. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Dave Haddon, a mere 25 years into the industry. So also a baby by comparison, just like Tash. I work in Technology Group, which is the bit of the BBC that looks after all our technology services, and specifically I work in broadcast and end-user technology, where my role is to devise and implement the BBC's strategy for video production tooling. So that's everything from cameras through to post-production systems, MAMs, and the distribution of our video assets to the audience.
Helps if you turn it on. James Sanford, 13 years in the role. So, yeah, age order.
That's why I had to say most of the panel.
So, I'm a project R&D engineer in BBC R&D. We're a bit of a weird group within the organisation. We're developing new technologies to improve media for both those that make it and those that consume it. And I'm currently focused on cloud-native production workflows. And, yeah, that's me.
Thank you very much. So if you're to look back over the past year then, and we're going to start with you, Gary, what's one major workflow shift that you've had? What were the challenges that came for that, and how did it impact your people? Okay,
so in my world, a year's a very short amount of time, so I'm going to go immediately off-piste and go wider than that. So I think if we look at, I'm going to use our continuing drama, so Coronation Street and Emmerdale as an example. If you look at kind of viewer habits and what people have been exposed to through streamers and the content that we now see being influenced by mobile devices and multi-screening, I think what's expected of our content these days has gone through quite a shift. The shallow depth of field, the more kind of PSC style filming and creative intent has moved massively in the past, even in the past 5 years. So in response to that, on our production teams, we've had to move from what's been quite a traditional vision mixed way of almost stage play content creation. So we're now moved a long way from that position where we're kind of mixing our camera technologies. We've got a lot more agile choice around that. And the content that we produce is more modern. I think it's got a way to go, but it's looking at the technology stack that we use to produce our productions when we're spending money that's CapEx based, that locks you into, say, a refresh every 8-10 years. And how does that work in this world? Where we've got developments that are going on in AI, where kit and camera technology is moving on so fast. How do we build in that agility to keep us at the top of our game? So I would say, kind of at a very high level, that refresh of our studio infrastructure, heading into post-production, there are the very obvious things that we can do to move that forward, but we're on the cusp of some changes that we'll see as be more agile, I think.
Thank you. Dave?
Yeah, so a bit like Gary, our our entire tech strategy is driven by audience behavior and audience need. And sometimes in technology, it's really easy to forget that, because basically our day-to-day customers aren't the audience, they're the production teams who are making the programs, but their customers are the audience. So it's really important in technology that we maintain that link. And in the past year, a good example of that has been some changes we've done to our sport post-production systems. So for kind of historical reasons, post-production in sport until about this time last year had a massive fracture down the middle. All of our long-form TV post-production was actually serviced by teams here in Dock 10 on long-form craft Avid systems. And because these newfangled digital lot had all sort of grown up round the side, they were living until 12 months ago effectively off the scraps of those systems around the side. So they would need to wait until material was edited for a long-form program, Match of the Day maybe, and then and only then would they get access to that same footage to be able to do digital clips to both BBC platforms and social platforms. So we instigated a change about 12 months ago to bring all of that together. And we had two choices, really. We could either bring what was serviced outside of the BBC into our own systems. That would have meant significant capital expenditure, which, as Gary said, is a problem across the industry, not just in the public service broadcasters. Or we had the choice to consolidate everything with our partners here in Dock 10, and we went for the latter. Huge amount of integration in that, because some of the way the material comes into the BBC is still largely through our buildings in Key House and Dock House here. So a lot of integration needed with our on-prem systems, our EVS systems, and Dock 10. But ultimately what that's meant is we've been able to unify post-production right across BBC Sport, so that there's a unification of access to it. So as soon as material is available, it's available not only for those making the long-form content for TV, but also for the teams who are making the digital content for sport, which, coming back to audience behavior, is obviously increasingly where people are consuming it anyway, right? So it's about kind of leveling up the digital and the linear workflows.
Yeah, so being in R&D, my position is a little bit different. So I'm doing a lot of looking out at the general direction of the business and the wider industry. So one of the observations over the last year has just been the amount of comfort that we've started to see within the industry for cloud-based workflows. And that was really evident at IBC this year with just the talk of things like dynamic media facilities all over the show. And it's gone from being something which was relatively niche and used for workflows that weren't that time critical, to increasingly moving towards that sort of more time critical business as usual live workflows. And that does not mean that everything ends up in the cloud, though, because we have to get stuff to the cloud. We have to capture stuff before it goes to the cloud. So we're seeing this move where the things that are hardware, to speak to the panel, we're seeing the world where the things that are hardware are the things that have to be hardware, the cameras, the lights, the microphones. And there are also a few things that are having to stay as hardware in those facilities because physics doesn't let them go anywhere else. So if you think about audio production, you might have heard this thing. If you delay someone's speech back to their own ear by 100 milliseconds, they can't talk anymore. They just fall over their own words. It's hilarious. Go look it up on YouTube. So if you think the speed of light from one end of the country to the other is about 10 milliseconds, return path, 20 milliseconds, add in buffers, add in processing, you very quickly hit that 100 milliseconds. So those sorts of workflows will remain sort of on-premise. But it might be a cloud on-premise. It might be a private cloud, so that we've got this general-purpose compute that's really flexible. So that seems to be something that's really starting to emerge and take hold in the industry this year.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And I suppose what comes with that is you're working with new vendors, already the same, but are those relationships changing in any way? What do they look like today versus what they've looked like previously?
I think for me, it's sitting here right now and kind of knowing my technical estate and the various ages of that kit. I guess what I'm looking for is agility. So the ability, I think Dave's just, hinted at kind of partnering and the kind of things that you've done with your post-production outfit. It's partnering with vendors, not necessarily to provide the service for us, but to have some agility around kit selection where that's appropriate. So, our camera estate, that moves so rapidly now in terms of technology and look that it's really important that whilst our core may remain the same for a number of years, we need the ability to chop and change and go with the times a bit and go with the look. So we'd be looking for vendors that can support that kind of that flexibility and agility. But that's a big change for us financially from away from a CapEx model to an OpEx model. And that's something that as a company, we're having to adapt to, and it is a bit of a learning. So I think in terms of vendor relationships, as we've already said, and James has pointed out, we're still going to need hardware. It's just the necessary hardware to make our kit work. Studio is still going to be there. Cameras are still going to be there. The interfacing is required. It's then how we join all of that together and work with those vendors to keep all of those different solutions talking nicely to each other. So, I'm not too worried about the tech and AI in terms of job security, and it's just change. And hey, change happens.
We talked a little bit about interoperability and what that sort of looks like between vendors. Do you want to talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, that's it's absolutely a massive point for us. So our, now CTO actually, or half CTO, Sinead has a phrase which is, the BBC is great in that over the years we have built a lot of great stuff, but it's a massive problem because we have built a lot of great stuff. And we've had historically technology teams who face into specific parts of the business. So a technology team for news, another one for sport, another one for children's, another one for long form. And what that has led to is great solutions individually for those individual production teams, but a variety of solutions to effectively do the same thing. We're trying to move now to a model in the BBC where if you have a common need, let's say video post-production, then surely to goodness, if you're on the same video post-production system in news and children's and everyone else, then there's economies of scale there at very least. And actually there's audience benefit because you've got unification of access to the same material. Back to your question, what we're really looking for vendors is vendors who can be flexible enough to help us bridge that gap. We've got an enormous tech estate in the BBC. Some of it's very old. Some of it isn't old enough to get rid of, but it's still on-prem and is still viable for us. And we need vendors who can be flexible enough to help us bridge that gap while we have a foot in both camps. Gary mentioned the move from CapEx to OpEx. That's another big problem for us in that we've still got a financial model which is largely based around very peaky capital spend on a system and then nothing for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, depending how long you sweat it, and then another massive peak, right? That's hard to plan around, and with the speed of technology change at the moment, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense because it means that people are held back on systems that they've got on premise just because 5 years ago we spent a lot of money on them and they're not broken yet. The alternative, though, OpEx model means finding money less money, but some money every year, and where does that come from? So and linking it back to the vendor question, vendors who can appreciate that position that we're in, where we want to get to, and be flexible with commercial models to help us get there. There's never going to be a moment when we have a massive big bang and get entirely in bed with one vendor and a massive technology ecosystem. That's not where we want to be. We want to partner with vendors who are the absolute market-leading best at what they do and who are happy to integrate with other technology vendors who are absolutely the market best leader at what they do. There's a tendency, a well-founded one, because there's some companies who do a lot of things very well, to say, all right, we're in the door now, and let's grow arms and tentacles into other parts of the business. That may be appropriate, but it needs to be something that's BBC-led rather than vendor-led. And we need that, just that openness of conversation about it.
And so we talked about, go on, Gary.
No, I was just curious as an ex-editor in terms of, growing a post-production platform across many different genres. Does that then relate to the same cutting tool, or do you still maintain preference in that? Because we'd struggle in that regard because our drama editors are very avid based, and they are often seen as some of the creative talent that under producer choice you have to facilitate. And I'm just interested.
Yeah. So in an ideal world, I'd love all my conversations with production teams in the BBC about post-production to be less about the NLE than they are.
Sorry.
Well, no, not at all, because it's kind of the right question, but we want to move to an area where editors and creatives are using the tool they're most comfortable with. And that might mean that we persist an absolute potpourri of NLEs across the business like we already have. What I'm convinced we can do, though, is unify the back end of that. So vendors who are open to being NLE agnostic, and you're seeing this now with big traditional NLE vendors, right, who will Avid support Premiere workflows against Nexus and Interplay right now. Yeah. So that's where we want to get to, where we can have a unified back end to our post-production system, and ultimately let the editors choose the NLE that's most appropriate to them. Now, that might be as simple as a browser edit if you're doing a fast turnaround piece for news, and it might be as something as complicated as a fully fledged Avid if you're doing a polished piece of post-production.
Yeah, I guess it's having those unified standards and interoperability between systems, which I guess you're working on.
And having a kit of pluggable components here. So we've spoken about trying to rationalize our estate so that we're not building the same sort of products 100 times throughout the business. But that means that they have to serve everything in the BBC, from the tiniest local radio station up to sometimes the Olympics. And that's a ridiculous ask of a product. And the only way that you can make that work on standardized, rationalized systems is if you are able to plug the bits that you need at any given time. It's really difficult, it's really expensive if you try and do that with monolithic stacks that try to do absolutely everything. And it also speaks to what you were saying about the rate of change within the world at the moment. When a new technology comes along, if we've signed a 10-year contract for a piece of hardware, we would have to pay huge amounts of money to integrate that with our existing setup. So if we've got standardized interfaces that give us that flexibility that we can plug something new into the system, that really helps us sort of move forward as a business, as an industry.
So there's lots that you need in order to be able to move forward, but you've got budget constraints and rising expectations. How are you managing that?
Best we can. Yeah, I mean, it's. I sit across two productions that are very big and have fixed infrastructure and have a workforce, we have to produce our day-to-day, and we do that on the technology stack that we have at the moment. Coronation Street and Emmerdale are very good at looking outside of that box and understanding the technologies that are there. We've got a really healthy overlap with our high-end drama department, which I have to say is very small in terms of technology. It's not big at all, but we keep across the camera tech, the workflows that when we pop up a high-end drama, and that's all freelance-based. We keep in touch with all of those people, and we pull some of that knowledge from our high end into the soaps when it's needed. We've just done some recording on ARRI 35s, running a high end drama workflow within the soaps. We wouldn't have done that 5 years ago. We might have done, but in very small amounts. And then it's getting it through a post-production system that's designed to work in HD at a number of streams. So we have to be quite agile and quite creative around our thinking to make it work. So yes, I think for us, we don't have a huge engineering support team, and we are very kind of genre specific. So I'd love to have an R&D department. That'd be amazing. But I'll keep talking to the BBC, thanks. And we do what we can within that, and then we will bring in external people to help us along the way. We can't fill all of those gaps internally, so we partner up and get consultants in, I guess.
Yeah. We've probably got like a four-step approach to doing more with less. The first thing we look to do wherever we can, and I touched on it before, is to sweat the assets we've already got. So not always ideal from a kind of bleeding edge technology point of view, but we've got a massive technology estate. A lot of it is in good health, and we need to sweat it. Secondly, we are looking at ways that we can maximize utilization of that existing estate. So we spent a lot of time over it was driven by COVID like everywhere else, but we spent a lot of time over the last few years working on remote access technologies. So again, looking at post-production, we've got three significantly sized long-form post-production estates. Now, geographically, they happen to be in our devolved nations. So they're in Belfast, they're in Glasgow, and they're in Wales. Elsewhere across the business, we've got teams within the BBC who need long-form post-production estates. And historically, they may have gone to the market, or they may have travelled to Cardiff, Belfast, or which one haven't I mentioned? PQ, thank you, PQ, Glasgow. So we spent a lot of time deploying properly secure, universally available remote access technologies to our existing estates. That's the second thing. Then we're looking, and this is back to the market and the vendor question, we're looking to the market to help us with dynamic burst, because to James's point about us needing to scale to the BAU, which is like this, and then these massive peaks for big events, both news events like coronations and so on, but also sporting events. So how can we look to work with vendors to integrate cloud burst technology into our existing facilities? And then, I guess, fourthly, it's back to the finance side. It's looking to divert money which would have been capital historically to OpEx so that we can fund those bursts. So that's how we're trying to do a little bit more with less.
I suppose, is it a bit of a plus that the estate is quite spread across the BBC, and that as you start to make these changes and simplify the workflow to be unified across the BBC, that you can start doing it in small chunks so you don't have to do it in one big hit?
Yeah, it really does. What would help even more is as technologies from vendors come along, which would help us even unify those three big centres, right? Yeah. Because at the moment, we can, and we have now provided really robust and workable remote access technologies for complex video workflows from people in their bedrooms through to facilities in the three devolved nations. But those three devolved nations still exist as kind of three independent silos. So we're really looking forward to the day when vendors allow us effectively consider that one amorphic blob of capability, which, yes, has a technical footprint in three places, but kind of fewer and fewer people kind of need to know that because it doesn't matter where your media is, or it shouldn't matter where your media is. So yes, it helps, but I think there's more we could do.
I think what's interesting is kind of, actually, there's no surprises here. Ultimately, we're kind of thinking the same thing. So in hardware and vendors and infrastructure and I guess end users, we're all heading in the same direction. It's all fairly coherent, I'd say.
Just how you get there, I suppose,
yeah,
and when.
Yeah.
James, in terms of in research and development, like where are you going now? Because I mean, with the cost cuts, a lot of the future tech that you've been working on is now being implemented, or be in future workflows that are planned. I suppose you mentioned a little bit about TAMS. I wonder if you might be able to talk to that a little bit.
Yeah. So we've spoken a little bit about interoperable standards that allow us to build different workflows on top of them. One of those for us has been this idea of a time addressable media store, which instead of like traditional media stores that are either on-prem with very fixed workflows or they work in files, this is all about cloud native workflows with very small chunks of media. So that allows us to get very close to that live edge, not 100% to live, but it hits those fast turnaround workflows, and it allows us to sort of start to blur that boundary between live and file-based workflows, which is really cool. But it does start to bring up some of the like little things that have to be considered when you move to the cloud off of being on-prem, because on-prem, everything is synchronous. You have a piece of cable that has one signal on it, and you know where that's going. And so we're decomposing that. We're blowing that apart. So You then have to sort of tie a lot more metadata alongside that media in terms of timing and identity so that you can reassemble it at the other end. And it does, though, give you a lot more flexibility because, yeah, like I say, you can move between those file-based workflows, and it means that we can write content once, use it many.
Okay. I think we'll wrap up with what I think is probably the most important thing is how it's impacting your people. You've got people cross generations who've, brought this stuff through from legacy through to where it is today. And, not everyone likes change. So how are you finding that?
Tash, when you say legacy, why are you looking at me?
No comment.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, ultimately, it's, I think, more than ever, where we sit right now, having been through kind of, analog SDI into IP-based infrastructure. None of this works without our talent and without our staff. So, the investment in talent and staff and engineering knowledge is hugely important. And it's having that discussion and making people part of the solution. At the end of the day, I'm just here to make telly, and how we do that is largely, our end viewers don't really care. So as long as we're delivering that with efficiency and maximising the amount of media, maximising the value out of the media that we gather, and getting the best possible product, we're all talking about the same thing. So, investing in staff is key. And making sure we're properly resourced and giving people enough time. So I'm very heavy in the day job, but actually being able to step outside of that and, I hate the term, but blue sky think, just having time and space and taking your team with you.
Yeah, very similar in a lot of respects. We're constantly thinking about the evolution of our engineering training at the BBC to recognise the fact that it's a whole different bunch of skill sets that are needed now and will be needed in the future compared to those of us who trained with the BBC quite a lot of years ago. And what that's to do with is about the skill sets of integration and partnerships and effectively kind of systems integration skills in a way that we didn't need to have before. There's less of a need these days to crack open the soldering iron. It happens occasionally, but there's more of a need to understand how System A is interfacing with System B at an API level and how's that working to and from the cloud and so on. So it's a whole different bunch of skills. How we're doing that is we're continuing to invest heavily in our engineering apprenticeship and trainee programs, which are backed by various universities around the UK, and then still some internal BBC engineering training. And then once in the business, or for those already in the business, a lot of opportunities. They've got colloquial BBC names like Hot Shoes and 80/20, but you get the idea. It's the opportunity to spend time in another area. So perhaps someone from our more traditional engineering department spend time with R&D or the operations engineers and so on for a couple of days a week or for 3 months of the year, that kind of thing, to get that breadth of knowledge from across the organisation. Where there's a huge amount of value on that is actually leaps even further, so from engineering into the production teams, so that you're on the other side of the buttons and the tooling to get an appreciation of the time. We were speaking earlier on about the time frames that Gary's teams work to for the turnaround of some of the soaps. I think it's not until you've been under those operational pressures that you have that empathy for it from the engineering side and an appreciation of why it's so important that actually you get to choose the NLE that you want, because if you're using the NLE you want, then perhaps you're going to be more able to meet some of the deadlines that Gary's working to.
Yeah, and just to build on that, we're seeing sort of, as we've mentioned, this transition towards cloud technologies, IP-based technologies. And it used to be that we were in a world where we had software engineers and we had broadcast engineers, and never the twain shall meet. And that's increasingly not the case anymore, because as we move away from SDI to things like 2110 or NDI, your broadcast engineers need to know how to work with high-performance IP networks. They need to be able to break out a packet analyzer every so often. But at the same time, on the other side, we have our software engineers who traditionally might just have picked up an SRT feed and chucked it straight on the website. And as we're asking more and more of them, they then need to know about things like generational loss as you move through multiple codecs. So we're starting to see a world where, these sort of skills of software and of and of network technologies, but also those traditional broadcast engineering skills that we know and love, they're starting to come together. And I think that's really exciting, I think, as we go into the future. Yeah.
There's nothing focuses the mind than being sat in I don't know how you do it now, but being sat in a news edit suite with your presenter reading the intro to your piece, and you're still dropping the last shots in as you go to air. It's good. It's good. Keeps you young.
Looks like. Not joking. So where should we be investing? We'll start with you, James, for the final time.
Timing and identity, like I mentioned before, it's something that we're just used to working when we're in traditional broadcast worlds. It needs a little bit more thought as we go into cloud. So timing and identity, something to definitely keep in mind with your products.
Vendor interoperability, true software as a service, not just shunting the same historic workflows up onto a cloud EC2, true software as a service, scalable, flexible solutions, and a meaningful focus on sustainability.
I can't really comment further, can I, really? I mean, you kind of,
You can try.
I think all of that and making sure that we take our teams with us.
I'm going to pull meaningful sustainability and say it's got to be my favourite, and I think Lisa will approve. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. We're done.